Husband's child-free sister refused to help care for our kids after we were hospitalized in a car accident, then 8 months later called asking to babysit so she could impress her new boyfriend by playing the perfect aunt. Looking back, it still feels like a nightmare that refuses to let go. 8 months ago, life as I knew it was flipped on its head. My husband and I had been driving home from a rare date night, something we barely managed with 2 young kids to care for, when a drunk driver sped through a red light and slammed into us. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital, disoriented and in pain, surrounded by beeping machines and panicked nurses. My first thought wasn't for myself but for my children. Who had them? Were they safe? I needed to know they were okay. Our neighbor, Mrs. Donahue, had been watching them that evening, as she'd kindly offered to help us enjoy our date night. She was a lifesaver at that moment because neither of us was in any condition to leave the hospital. But Mrs. Donahue was elderly and had her own limitations. When the doctors told me I'd be bedridden for weeks and that my husband would need at least 4 months before he could even walk without crutches, I panicked. Who could care for our kids long term? My parents were out of state and couldn't travel due to health reasons, and his parents, while loving, were in no shape to chase after a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. That's when I thought of his sister, Trina. She lived nearby and had always been vocal about being child-free, but surely this was different. This wasn't a request to babysit so we could enjoy a night out, this was an emergency. My husband was hesitant, mumbling that Trina wasn't exactly the nurturing type, but I didn't have the energy to argue. We were desperate, and family was supposed to be there for you, right? When we called Trina and explained the situation, her response hit me like a slap to the face. She said she couldn't disrupt her routine or compromise her boundaries because of our accident. She had chosen a child-free lifestyle and couldn't be expected to step in just because we were in a bind. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, like we were asking her to run an errand rather than help with a life and death situation. I was stunned. My husband tried to reason with her, pointing out that we weren't asking for a permanent arrangement, just help until we could get back on our feet. But she held firm, saying it wasn't her responsibility to alter her life for ours. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't like Trina had a demanding job or any major obligations. She worked part-time at a boutique and spent most of her evenings posting about her vegan recipes and yoga sessions on social media. I kept thinking, how could someone be so self-centered? She wasn't even apologetic, just blunt. It was clear she didn't care. In the end, it was Mrs. Donahue who stepped up. She couldn't do everything herself, but she rallied a group of neighbors who pitched in to help. They took turns watching the kids, dropping off meals, and running errands. Their kindness brought me to tears, but it also deepened my resentment towards Trina. Here were virtual strangers going out of their way to support us, while a family member refused to lift a finger. I tried asking my mother-in-law to help out when she could because she lived closer to us, but she only came once to the hospital to check up on her son. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Between physical therapy sessions and trying to manage the household from a hospital bed, I was exhausted. My husband was doing his best, but he was limited by his own injuries. Every time I thought about Trina, I felt a wave of anger rising up. She hadn't even checked in to see how we were doing. It was like we didn't exist. The rift she created wasn't just between me and her, it extended to my husband as well. He didn't defend her outright, but his refusal to confront her left me feeling unsupported. He'd say things like she's always been this way or it's just how Trina is, as if that excused her behavior. I wanted him to be as outraged as I was, to call her out for her selfishness, but he remained neutral, caught between his wife and his sister. It became an unspoken rule in our house not to mention her name, but the resentment lingered like a shadow over everything. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. My husband and I healed physically, but emotionally, I was still raw. I focused on the kids and tried to push the anger aside, though it wasn't easy. Every time I saw Trina's name pop up on social media, showing off her latest vacation or some extravagant meal she'd cooked, it reignited the bitterness. She didn't just refuse to help, she moved on without a care while we were struggling. What hurt the most wasn't just her refusal, it was the principle of it. Emergencies reveal who truly cares, and Trina had made it painfully clear where we stood in her priorities. Family, to her, was an abstract concept, something she could opt in and out of as it suited her. I couldn't understand how someone could be so indifferent, so detached from the people who were supposed to matter most. By the time the dust settled, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let Trina back into our lives, not easily. She had shown me exactly who she was, and I wasn't about to give her a free pass. It didn't matter if my husband thought I was overreacting or if the rest of the family thought I was being too harsh. Trina had drawn a line in the sand, and I intended to hold her to it. Little did I know, she'd be the one crossing that line just a few months later, but not for the reasons I would have expected. It was a quiet morning when Trina's name popped up on my phone, and for a second, I thought I'd imagined it. 8 months had passed since the accident, and not once had she called or texted. I stared at her name on the screen, debating whether to answer. Curiosity got the better of me, so I picked up, bracing myself for whatever excuse or half-hearted apology she might offer. She didn't even start with pleasantries. She launched straight into how she had exciting news to share. Apparently, she'd been dating someone new, a guy named Kevin who, according to her, was a family man. She stressed how much he valued close-knit relationships and how it was important for her to show him that she was, in her words, a hands-on aunt. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. She went on casually, asking if she could come over to spend time with the kids that afternoon or if I could drop them off. The audacity of it hit me like a brick. 8 months of silence, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the hell we'd been through, and now she wanted to play the doting aunt? I was so stunned I couldn't even form a coherent response. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why she thought this was appropriate. She laughed it off, saying it wasn't that serious and that she just wanted to bond with the kids. I told her point blank that she'd made it clear she wasn't interested in being part of their lives when it mattered most. I reminded her of the countless times we'd begged her for help and how she'd brushed us off without a second thought. Her tone shifted, it sounded defensive and annoyed. She said that she didn't see why I was still holding a grudge over something that was in the past. Everyone has boundaries, she said, and it wasn't fair of us to expect her to abandon hers just because we had an emergency. She claimed that she wasn't anti-family but that she needed to protect her lifestyle choices. I couldn't help it, I laughed, but it was bitter and cold. Protect her lifestyle choices? Was she serious? I told her that boundaries were one thing, but selfishness was another. Her refusal to step up wasn't about protecting herself, it was about sheer indifference. I said it wasn't just about her lack of action, it was the principle. Emergencies don't respect boundaries, and real family should be there when it counts. Trina didn't like hearing that. She snapped back that I was being overly dramatic, that she didn't owe us anything. Her voice was sharp, and she accused me of trying to guilt her for making decisions that were best for her. But then she pivoted, trying to soften her tone, saying that she really wanted to make up for the past and show Kevin what a great aunt she could be. That was when I lost it. I told her in no uncertain terms that my children weren't props for her to use to impress her new boyfriend. If she thought she could waltz back into their lives without taking accountability for her actions, she was delusional. I said I wasn't interested in her half-baked attempts at reconciliation, especially when they were so blatantly self-serving. Her response was to call me petty and vindictive, accusing me of punishing her for something she couldn't change. She said I was being unfair and selfish for denying the kids a chance to have a relationship with their aunt. I told her that relationship wasn't mine to deny, it was hers to ruin, and she had done a fantastic job of that on her own. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. I replayed the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd been too harsh. But then I thought about all the sleepless nights, the pain, the stress of those first few months after the accident, and I knew I was justified. Trina had shown me who she was, and I wasn't going to forget it. Am I in the wrong here? Update 1. She wasn't done. 2 weeks later, she showed up at our doorstep with Kevin in tow. I wasn't home at the time, but my husband answered the door and let them in, much to my dismay. When I got back, they were sitting in the living room, Trina gushing about how she'd love to take the kids out for ice cream or to the park and have them over more often. Kevin chimed in, saying he thought it was wonderful that Trina wanted to be a more active part of the family. I stood there staring at them, barely able to contain my frustration. I turned to my husband, asking him why he hadn't told me they were coming. He shrugged, saying he didn't see the harm in letting them visit. I told Trina, in front of everyone, that her sudden interest in my kids wasn't welcome. I said it was clear she wasn't doing this out of love but out of convenience. She had no right to show up uninvited and act like everything was fine when she'd done nothing to mend her previous actions. Kevin tried to step in, saying that family relationships could be complicated but that they were worth salvaging. I turned to him and asked, "Do you even know what she did?" I told him about our accident and how Trina said her child-free lifestyle choices were more important. At that moment, I asked him how he would feel if someone abandoned him in his time of need and then came back acting like nothing had happened. He looked surprised, he didn't have an answer. Trina's face hardened, and she accused me of being unreasonable, saying I was blowing things out of proportion. She said I needed to let go of the past and focus on the future. That was the last straw. I told her that letting go wasn't the issue, trust was. She'd made it clear she couldn't be relied on, and I wasn't about to let her hurt my kids the way she'd hurt me and my husband emotionally. I said that forgiveness required effort and accountability, neither of which she had shown. When she saw she wasn't getting anywhere, she resorted to guilt tripping, saying that I was being cruel by denying her the chance to be part of the kids' lives. I told her cruelty was what she had done when she turned her back on us in our darkest hour. If she wanted forgiveness, she needed to earn it, and showing up unannounced with her pro-family boyfriend wasn't the way to do it. Trina stormed out, dragging Kevin with her. My husband sat there looking conflicted. He said I'd been too harsh and that maybe I should give her a chance to make things right. I told him I wasn't against reconciliation, but it needed to be genuine. Trina wasn't here to mend relationships, she was here to impress Kevin. I said I'd had enough of her selfishness and wasn't going to let her manipulate her way back into our lives. For the next few days, the house was tense. My husband didn't bring Trina up again, but I could tell he was still upset. I wasn't budging, though. If Trina wanted a relationship with my kids, she needed to start by showing she cared about their well-being, not her image. Update 2. A few weeks passed without any word from Trina, and I was grateful for the quiet. It gave me time to focus on my family and regain some peace of mind after her unexpected visit. But of course, Trina wasn't one to let things go. One evening, I got a text from her. It was oddly formal, almost rehearsed, as if she'd drafted it multiple times before sending it. She claimed she'd been doing some soul searching and realized that maybe she hadn't handled things well in the past. She admitted she let me down during the accident and said she wanted to make amends. She even offered to babysit the kids for an evening if we wanted a break. It was a tempting offer, but I couldn't ignore the timing. Just a few weeks earlier, she'd been defensive and dismissive, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Now, suddenly, she was turning over a new leaf? The skeptic in me couldn't help but think this was another ploy to get back in my good graces for Kevin's sake, not ours. I showed the messages to my husband, asking him what he thought. He shrugged and said that maybe I should take her up on it, even if only to see if she was serious about changing. He reminded me that holding on to resentment wouldn't do us any good, especially if she was genuinely trying to make things right. His words lingered in my mind for days. I didn't want to be the kind of person who held grudges, but I also didn't want to be naive. Trina had shown her true colors more than once, and I wasn't convinced a few well-worded texts were enough to erase that. Still, I decided to test the waters. I messaged her back, saying that if she was serious about wanting to make amends, she'd need to start by acknowledging the hurt she caused. I told her I wasn't interested in empty gestures or half-hearted apologies. If she wanted to be part of our lives, she needed to show that she was reliable. I told her that letting my kids go over for now wasn't something I would allow. Her response came quickly, and it was clear she wasn't expecting me to push back. She said she thought her message had already acknowledged her mistakes and that it wasn't fair for me to keep bringing up the past. She insisted she was trying her best and accused me of making it harder for her to fix things. I felt my patience wearing thin. It was like talking to a wall. No matter how I framed it, she couldn't or wouldn't understand that trust required more than just saying the right things. I told her as much, adding that if she wasn't willing to put in the effort, there was no point in continuing the conversation. She didn't reply after that, and I figured that was the end of it. Update 3. I should have known better. Trina wasn't one to take no for an answer, especially when she wanted something. About a week later, my husband and I were at the park with the kids when Trina showed up out of nowhere. She was dressed to the nines, clearly trying to impress someone. Sure enough, Kevin was trailing behind her, looking a little uncomfortable. She greeted us like nothing had happened, her voice bright and cheerful. She bent down to say hello to the kids, who responded hesitantly. They didn't know her well enough to be excited by her presence, which seemed to catch her off guard. I crossed my arms, waiting for her to address the elephant in the room. Instead, she launched into a story about how she and Kevin had just come from brunch and thought it would be nice to spend the afternoon with us. Kevin chimed in, saying he thought it was great that Trina was making an effort to reconnect with family. I could feel my irritation bubbling beneath the surface, but I kept my tone neutral as I asked her why she hadn't called ahead. She waved off the question, saying she didn't think it was a big deal, and my husband told her where we were. She said she just wanted to spend time with the kids and figured we wouldn't mind. I shot a look at my husband, who seemed torn between backing me up and avoiding a confrontation. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I told Trina that showing up uninvited wasn't the way. I said that if she was serious, she needed to respect our boundaries and stop trying to force her way back into our lives. Trina's cheerful facade cracked. She said she didn't understand why I was being so difficult. She claimed she was doing everything she could to make things right, but I was shutting her out at every turn. Kevin jumped in, saying he thought I should give Trina a chance to prove herself. That was when I lost my composure. I told Trina that actions speak louder than words, and so far, her actions had only shown me that she cared more about appearances than actual relationships. I pointed out that she'd ignored us for months when we needed her most and was now trying to play the role of the caring aunt because it suited her narrative. I asked Kevin if this was the type of woman he wanted to be the mother of his kids. Trina's face turned red, and she accused me of being bitter and unforgiving. She said I was holding her to an impossible standard. She even had the audacity to say that my negativity was setting a bad example for the kids. That was the last straw. I told her that my responsibility was to protect my children from people who couldn't be trusted, and right now, that included her. I said she had no right to lecture me about setting examples when she'd consistently shown that she valued her own comfort over her family's well-being. Kevin looked like he wanted to sink into the ground, but Trina wasn't done. She accused me of trying to alienate her from the family and said I was being unfair. I told her fairness went out the window the moment she turned her back on us. I said I wasn't going to apologize for not wanting a family like her. By the time the argument ended, Trina was fuming, and Kevin was awkwardly trying to diffuse the tension. My husband stayed silent, which only added to my frustration. Trina stormed off, dragging Kevin with her again, but not before loudly declaring that she was done trying to please me. I'd made my stance clear. Update 4. It had been a few weeks since Trina's last visit, and I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message. But as usual, my optimism was misplaced. This time, she decided to involve my parents and my in-laws. His mother called one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. I could hear her voice even though the phone wasn't on speaker. It was sharp and insistent. She asked him why I was so intent on causing unnecessary tension in the family. She said Trina was doing her best to mend things, and it wasn't fair for me to keep shutting her out. My husband handled the call with more patience than I would have. He calmly explained that we had valid reasons for being upset and that Trina's actions weren't exactly helping her case. His mother wasn't having it. She said that family was family and that it was time to move on. I took the phone from him and yelled at my mother-in-law that she needed to stop enabling Trina's behavior. I reminded her how she and her baby girl had refused to help when we were in the hospital, how she'd ignored our calls and left us all alone. I asked her what was her reasoning then. I said forgiveness didn't mean pretending everything was fine, it meant addressing the damage and holding people accountable. I hung up on her after that. My husband said his mother didn't understand why we couldn't just forgive Trina and let her spend more time with the kids. He was still trying to stay neutral, but I wasn't in the mood for diplomacy. He asked if I could at least meet Trina halfway. He said his mom thought I was taking things too personally, but she didn't mean to anger me. His tone was cautious, careful, like he was testing the waters to see how I'd react. I didn't even give him a chance to finish. I asked him why he couldn't see what was so blatantly obvious, why he couldn't stand up to his family for once instead of tiptoeing around their feelings. I said it was exhausting being the only one fighting for what was right while he sat on the fence pretending to mediate. He said I was being unfair. He claimed he was trying to keep the peace and that it wasn't as simple as taking sides. He said he understood my frustration, but he also had to think about the bigger picture. And that's when I snapped. I told him he could shove his so-called diplomacy right where the sun didn't shine. I said his constant need to play peacemaker was enabling Trina and his mother to walk all over us, mostly me and our children. I said if he wanted to keep pandering to them, he could do it alone because I was done playing nice. He straightened up, his eyes narrowing. He asked me what that was supposed to mean, and I didn't hold back. I told him it meant that if he didn't start backing me up, there would be consequences. I said I wasn't going to keep fighting this battle by myself while he tried to keep everyone happy. I said it wasn't my job to make his family comfortable at the expense of my sanity. He said family conflicts were never black and white, and I needed to stop making ultimatums. I laughed and told him to shut up. I was so angry at him. I told him that this wasn't about black and white. If it was, I wouldn't have kept quiet for so long. I said his sister had disrespected us repeatedly, abandoned us in our time of need, and was now trying to manipulate us for her own gain. I asked him how he could possibly see this as a situation that required neutrality. He tried to say something, but I cut him off. I told him I was tired of being the villain in his family's eyes while he played the nice guy. I said I was tired of his mother's guilt trips and Trina's fake apologies. I said I was tired of fighting for us while he stood by watching from the sidelines. He lowered his eyes, saying he was just trying to handle things in a way that didn't completely destroy the family dynamic. I said the family dynamic was already destroyed the moment his sister refused to help us without any compassion whatsoever. I told him that the problem wasn't that she refused, it was how she refused. I said his family made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. I told him I was done being the scapegoat, and if he couldn't stand with me, he was welcome to join them on the other side. I told him I wasn't asking for much, just for him to show some loyalty to his own wife and kids. I asked him if he even realized how hurtful it was to feel like I was in this fight alone. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. But then he said he didn't think this was worth tearing the family apart over. I froze, disbelief washing over me. I asked him if he thought I was tearing the family apart. I asked him if he really believed this mess was my fault. He hesitated in his response, which enraged me. I told him he was pathetic, that his need to keep the peace was going to cost him the one person who actually had his back. I asked if his mother was the one who had taken care of him a couple of months ago and helped him recover. I said if he wanted to side with his family, that was fine, but he shouldn't expect me to go along with it. I said I had enough self-respect to stand up for myself, even if he didn't. He looked shocked. I asked how he would feel if his sister had taken our children to the park but didn't watch over them and was busy making out with her boyfriend, and our kids got into an accident. I asked if that would finally open his eyes. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, stunned. I told him I was done arguing. I had nothing else to say. I said if he wanted to salvage what was left of this marriage, he needed to start showing me that I mattered more than his family's fragile egos. Then I walked out of the kitchen. I needed to breathe. I needed some space. I sat in the living room. A few minutes later, he came and sat near me. He didn't seem as blockheaded as before. He admitted that I was right, he had been hiding behind his so-called diplomacy, using it as a shield to avoid confrontation. He confessed that it was easier to let me play the bad guy because it saved him from having to stand up to his family. Hearing him admit it was validating, but it also stung more than I'd expected. I asked him why he thought that was okay and why he thought it was fair to leave me out there on my own, bearing the brunt of his family's judgment. He said it wasn't okay, and that was the part he regretted most. He admitted he had taken advantage of my protectiveness, knowing I would always step up when things got tough. He said he'd been selfish, letting me shoulder the blame while he tried to keep everyone happy. His voice cracked a little as he went on, saying that he realized now how much pressure he'd put on me. He said he saw how lonely it must have felt to fight those battles alone, especially when I should have been able to rely on him. He admitted that he hadn't been a good partner and that he hated himself for it. I sat there staring at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him on the spot, but another part of me wasn't ready to. I asked him why it took him so long to see it, why he couldn't have had this epiphany before things got so bad. He said he didn't have a good answer for that, only that he'd been too caught up in his own fears of rocking the boat. He said he'd been so focused on maintaining the illusion of harmony that he didn't realize he was sacrificing something much more important, our trust, our partnership. His words hit me hard, and for a moment, I had to look away. I told him that his family's behavior was one thing, but his betrayal was another. I said I could handle the judgment, the guilt trips, and the manipulations from them, but I couldn't handle feeling like I was in this alone. He reached out then, gently placing a hand on mine. He said he understood that now and he promised to do better. He said he would stand with me from now on, even if it meant upsetting his family. He said he was done hiding behind excuses and letting me carry the weight of everything. I could see the sincerity in his eyes. I told him that actions would speak louder than words, and he nodded, saying he was ready to prove it. The tension between us began to ease. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was something to hold on to. A few days later, Trina tried another tactic. She invited us all to a family dinner at their parents' house. The invitation came with an overly cheerful message. I almost laughed when I read it. It was so transparently fake that I didn't even bother responding. My husband said he'd already refused them and it wasn't worth it. The kids, thankfully, were too young to fully grasp the drama. Edit. Since a lot of you were asking for an update on Trina's boyfriend, here it is. This is around a month later, he broke up with her. Looks like he finally saw through her facade. And no, he wasn't rich, but from what I know, he lived a comfortable lifestyle.